Hi, my name is Caro. I'm a therapist and a communications designer, and I currently work on a book about menstruation for girls called Red. And I decided to share some of the interviews that I'm currently doing for my research. And today I'm really happy to speak to Nehama Grenimann Bauch, who is an art therapist from Israel, but she currently lives in Berlin, Germany, and is doing her PhD and lots of other things that I'm sure she'll talk about in a minute. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, the first question I usually ask is quite broad. Just anything you would like to share about yourself that you think is important, anything about your background and family, profession.
Well, I'm originally from Jerusalem in Israel, and I lived in Italy for a while, and then studied art therapy in Israel and moved to Germany. So that's in a nutshell. Because my parents come from other countries, so I'm pretty all over the place. Yeah, I'm an art therapist, and I don't know if I have a lot more to say about what I do. I work as an art therapist. I'm doing research, and I do art. I design Jewish wedding certificates, which is a very specific tradition. And yeah, in my spare time, I like to create in various ways.
Great, thank you. So, since we're talking about menstruation today, the first question would just be what your relationship is to menstruation, the female cycle in general, maybe.
Yeah, mine is very simple. We'll go into the story and I'll explain why. I'm also a mother of 2 children, so I guess that makes a difference in terms of my relationship to menstruation, because it's very connected. Which is very interesting because I saw in your first interview, so Camilla mentioned being one of the first girls among her friends to get her period. So I'm the other way around. I was the last. So I was 15 or 16. Everyone else already got it, and I felt like maybe something's wrong with me, or out of the club. I didn't know what they were talking about because I didn't get it. So I had a mixture of relief and dread when I got it the first time, because I was so happy to feel like, oh, actually I'm normal and I'm part of my peer group. But I had a lot of pain. So that wasn't very easy. Yeah, that pretty much colors my relationship to it, because there's a sense of pride, I think. Growing up, I had a very, very strong friendships with girls, and so there's a sense of pride of being a woman and part of the group, and knowing what it means and growing up. But I also had very strong pains, so that made it very hard to deal with.
Another question that I usually find quite interesting is like, so you're having experience of different cultures now, but what you experience in your upbringing, like how was menstruation perceived in your culture or in your society, and how do you think that also affected you in some ways, or maybe also how it might affect teenagers today?
Well, I think culture is a multi-layered thing. So it wasn't that there was only one culture influencing it. My parents both grew up in the United States and Australia in the 60s and 70s, in a very open society. So A lot of the, you know, hippie flower girl, talk about everything kind of mentality came to the family. And actually, my mother had a book called Our Bodies, Ourselves. So it was about, you know, there was a lot of feminist rallying, fighting for women's rights in that time as well. And there were a group of women, I don't know the history well enough to give you the exact details, but there was a group of women that said, we want to take charge of what we know about our body. And they collected knowledge among women in this big book to share, like woman to woman, all about your body. And of course, very much about any woman's part of the body. And that's actually an initiative that goes on till today. Actually, my closest friend worked on a project that translated it into Hebrew in Israel. So I will, yeah, I'll share the link with you because it's very interesting. So that book from the 70s was in our house, and there was nothing that was taboo to talk about. So completely open to discuss, you know, what's happening, what do you need, when you need. But I also come from a religious home, a Jewish religious home. And so there are rules and ideas about menstruation. There are quite a lot actually in Judaism. For me, in the environment that I grew up, in the way that I grew up, they mix together in a way that is okay. Not true for any Jew, you know, there are different levels of religion, different ways of believing. But I think two main things in the religion that are really important in Judaism is that the celebration, which is not different from lots of other cultures that celebrate that period of time in a woman and a man's life. But we have bat mitzvah in Judaism. So when you're 12, you have a big celebration. And obviously that celebrates, and boys have it when they're 13. And in both cases, you're celebrating moving into, you know, the next stage, growing up. So, yeah, I mean, I find it beautiful that it's celebrated. It's not celebrated in the sense of there's no mention of period when it comes to bat mitzvah. But of course, it's implied that this is the time that your body changes, obviously. And you turn into part of the community, of the sort of the adult part of the community. And the second most important tradition has to do with marriage. So that's, there are many, many, many sets of laws that, yeah, there are so many different, I don't want to say levels, but there are different ways of taking it. And the most important part about it is the mikveh. So the mikveh, it's not only for women, but it's specifically when it comes to menstruation, it's specifically a rule for women. It's a water source. It could be any natural water source. Usually there are special buildings for it has to be pure water. There are lots of rules about what kind of water it is. A mikveh is something that you dip in 3 times. You have to go your whole body in, and you say a prayer. And women do that the night before they get married. And then from the moment they get married, every time 7 days after the end of their period. So there's a whole set of rules of how you count the days and what does that mean. And but either way, you count a certain amount of days, and then you purify yourself by dipping in the mikveh. And so when it comes to marriage, it's rules that are not simple, because you're not supposed to come close to your husband until you dip. So it's all about purity. Are you pure? Are you not pure? There's a lot of, in the religion, talk about purity and not purity. So it's a complex one. I have a complex relationship to it. I gave you like on the tip of the iceberg. It's I've got a complex relationship to that. I've learned from some amazing, really amazing women who know much more than me about these types of things, who do that as a profession, give consulting about all these kinds of rules. And I think there's a lot of beauty in the, or put it this way, some people see it as this purity, non-purity discussion is something that degrades women, and that's fair enough. But I don't see it that way. There are a lot of women that don't see it that way, because giving space for it and talking about it, I think is very important. And there are a lot of very, very nice things that come out of it, especially this connection between women, the support between women that happens, because it's all women consulting with women, talking about when do you go, when do you do the dipping, checking that you do it correctly. It's all around women with women. So yeah, that's, I can send a link, and then that would make maybe more sense, because it's very hard for me to give all those things. But I guess if you're asking about me specifically, then yeah, then I have that complex relationship to it culturally. And I guess the third aspect is just contemporary. You know, I grew up in a very modern city, modern country. When I was growing up, there were lots of ads for tampons. And one really strong memory I have is I must have been maybe 13 or 14, so I didn't get my period yet, actually. It was all talk that didn't make much sense to me, other than the image of it. But there was tampon company that there was a big festival, like a rock festival, and there was a company that funded buses, because it was in a different place. It was like in the desert, so they funded buses for young girls to get on these buses for free, and you got samples of tampons for it. Okay. It's a very weird experience. I think when you're that young, you don't think about how, I mean, I was aware that they were trying to sell me something, but you don't think that deeply about it. You know, you just say, hey, a free ride to a rock concert. Fine. Great. But yeah, I just remember that it was a bus full of young women going to a rock concert with samples of tampons. I don't know if that's a good thing or not a good thing, but it was out in the open.
But it leads me to another question that I had. Like, what do you think teenagers could benefit from knowing about menstruation?
Well, so that's, we did the little roundabout cultural, as complicated as it was, but I think that for me, what I didn't get into much is when I was mentioning my period pains. So I ended up having something called endometriosis, or probable endometriosis. And I think even if it sounds a little scary, because I was mentioning that I had a lot of pain, it's very, very important to know. I would have loved to know before I got my period. It's one in 10 women is the statistic. 1 in 10 women have it, which is a lot if you think about it. So if you have a class of 30 girls, 3 will have this. Again, I'll send a link. I won't go into gory details about what happens, but what's important, I think, for young girls to know is that pain when you get your period is normal, but not to accept that just any kind of pain is normal. Like if you feel like this isn't right, if you feel like I can't deal with this is too much. I, for one, from my first periods, I used to faint from the pain. So it was obvious that something was not okay. You don't have to faint for it to be that. But there are a lot of symptoms around it, and there's so much information now. There's no need to be in the dark about it. So it can affect your digestion if you have endometriosis around your period time. You can also have PMS, pre-menstruation syndrome. So when you also are in a bad mood, for instance, before, but that's not, I mean, endometriosis. That's just, it can be as well because it affects the level of hormones you have. So it can affect your moods. I don't think I want to get into all the details of what the symptoms are, but I think that it would be really important, yes, to know about it, even if you're young and just starting. And especially important to know that not all doctors know what it is. In medicine today, and that's where our bodies ourselves is still so important as a project. There's still a lot that doctors don't know about women's bodies and about what is normal and what needs to be checked. And so the most important thing is not to be afraid to ask. And even if the doctor gives you the feeling that oh, it's nothing, or you're just exaggerating, that's not okay. The doctor needs to take it seriously if you say that you feel like there's something going on. So I will send links. I, for one, there's in Israel, and I know there are in other countries as well. In Israel, there's an organization for support for women who have endometriosis, and it's open for teenagers as well. It's open for anyone. Full of women that give information that that can help you not feel alone if you have too much pain, for example. An example of a lot of pain is not being able to sleep. So you can't sleep through the night because it hurts so much. So yeah, there are groups of women who support women and who can give this information. So really not to be ashamed about it, to share, to ask questions, to find answers. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing this. It sounds quite important. I think this is already the last question, and you've kind of already answered it with writing about when things don't feel normal, and the potential for having something like endometriosis is important. But is there anything else you feel that should definitely not be missing in the book, like that should be in there?
Well, I mean, I'm sure you're considering this, and I'm actually not, I haven't found my way in this way, but I think ecology is important. So I really wanted to get these, the what are they called? The underpants that you can wash. I haven't gotten around to getting them yet. So I can't recommend from experience, but I definitely recommend thinking of ways that are good for your body and good for the environment. And I will try to also work on my way.
Also kind of to give knowledge what's out there and what we can consider.
Yeah, what are the considerations? And I mean, if you're using, I guess good old white tampons are not a thing of the past, but they're going out of fashion. But if you're using them, be aware of the dangers of keeping them in for too long. And I know someone who fainted from it. So really keep the instructions. There's a reason there are instructions for these things.
Yeah. Okay, to keep that in mind. Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm wondering, is there anything that you'd like to share that I haven't asked you yet?
Oh, you know what? I do have one thing to say that's important, which is connected, but not necessarily connected to endometriosis, and in theory obvious, but not that obvious, which is the connection to nutrition and to movement and sport. Um, you know, it's really important to listen to your body. Sometimes we might want to eat something else in the time that we've got our period, or we might feel pressure to do some kind of sport, but maybe in a certain day in the month, it's less appropriate, or our body doesn't feel like it's comfortable to do that.
Mm.
So, I mean, each woman's body is very individual, but I definitely recommend keeping that in mind, that it's not just, it's not in your head if you feel like your body is telling you something. That something's not comfortable,
Mm.
for example.
To just listen to yourself, basically. Listen to what you're feeling.
Yeah, I mean, as a teenager, I used to forget to have breakfast. I used to forget to
Mm.
eat. And so that made it easier for me to faint from pain, for example.
Mm.
So, that's an extreme case, but
So
yeah,
taking care of yourself, like,
notice.
times.
Well, you might be someone who really at that moment doesn't need to eat, so it's so
Mm.
individual, but really notice the cues that your body is giving you,
Mm.
despite whatever pressure from outside.
Mm. Okay, that's a good last sentence, I think, to finish on. Well, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure. And yeah, very enriching interview.